Hey everyone, I'm Thomas Rayner, Microsoft MVP for Cloud and Data Center Management, and also an Honorary Scripting Guy. I hope you've been enjoying the MVPDays virtual conference for February here. I know I'm getting a lot of good information too. Very excited about the agenda we have today, but I'm even more excited about my session. That's this one happening right now on writing your first Azure function. If you want to talk to me about this or other sessions or anything cloud data center management related, the best way to do that's on Twitter. It's right there. As well, you can contact me on LinkedIn, leave a comment on my blog, etc. And you can get these slides and other slides for my demos and code files and samples and things like that on my GitHub. So, without further ado, let's talk about Azure Functions, shall we? First, before you can build one, you've got to know what an Azure function is. And there's three big features that, as a newcomer to them, that are going to be important for you to know. The first is they're serverless. And that's not to say, like, everything runs on a server, right? The term serverless can be a little bit misleading. What that means is you don't manage the server. You don't have to worry about the infrastructure. Traditionally, of course, applications run on a box that runs Windows or Linux or something else. And you've got to worry about patching it and updating it, and what happens if a hard drive dies? You better replace that, etc. This runs in Azure, so you immediately don't have to worry about the hardware. And it's serverless, which means you don't have to worry about the OS either. All you have to worry about is the code that runs on it. And this code can be a variety of languages. Today our demo is going to be PowerShell, but C#, F#, Python, Bash as well. A whole wide variety of languages I'll show you in a rundown as we're getting into our demo later. And of course, runs on Azure, right? So if you've got an Azure subscription, it's really easy to get started playing with these. You can get a trial for Azure as well, 30-day free trial. And functions are really inexpensive. They're easy to get started with and play around with and kind of get your feet wet. And they're not going to break the bank as you, or run through your trial dollars or anything like that, or a credit that you might have secured as a promotion. That'll go a really long way as you start playing with Azure Functions. It's definitely going to be enough to help you figure out where you're going. And then, like, this whole begs the question, why? Like, why would you want to do this? What's wrong with just having a server? What's wrong with the other applications and app services and things like that? And a big thing that we're looking at today is the ability to call a webhook. This is what the logo for webhooks is, if you're not familiar. And the webhook is the ability to call this through other APIs. And so you can marry different services together. You can have something every time maybe you use ServiceNow, and every time ServiceNow creates a new incident in a table, you want it to kick off an Azure function. Or you want to make this API publicly available for your customers, etc. There's lots of flexibility. That's what this picture is trying to show you here. You can make this into whatever shape you want. If you can code it, it'll run. There's not a lot of limitations in terms of what you can build with it, at least not outside your imagination. So it's kind of up to you to figure out what workloads are best suited for Azure Functions. And hopefully as you kind of get a brief look at what they're good at and what you can do with them here, you'll be able to determine what kind of workloads make sense for you to put there. So let's do a demo. How about that? Enough talk. Let's actually see how to do some of this. Where is my dashboard? There we are. We're in my Azure portal dashboard. This is a familiar look for most of you people who've ever used Azure services before. And you can provision these with PowerShell. You can provision these with ARM templates. But probably the easiest thing to do is just hit New and search the marketplace for function. And we want a function app. And we'll create a new one of those. And I'm going to name this. It's going to have a unique name, .azurewebsites.net, so I'm going to go MVPDays demo 1. Look at me. We're going to create a new resource group for it so I can clean this up after. Your operating system, you can run these on Windows, or as a preview, you can run them on Linux as well. So if you've got like a Python script that depends on having some specific Linux libraries, you can have these running on a Linux host. Again, serverless doesn't mean that there's no server, it just means that you don't have to worry about the server. So whatever platform that this thing runs on, do you want it to be Windows or Linux? We're just going to pick Windows because it's what I'm most comfortable in and it's what is going to make sense for our demo. Hosting consumption plan, you've got two choices. You have a consumption plan and app service plan. The little tooltip will tell you pretty clearly the consumption plan lets you pay per execution. The app service plans let you have a predefined capacity. So I'm not going to have very many executions of this. I'm going to clean it up right away. So I'm going to just go with a consumption plan. Location, I can put this wherever. I'm going to put it in Canada Central. And I can make a new storage account or use an existing one. Again, this is standard, kind of par for the course here. Okay, click Create, get this thing rolling. We'll validate the things that I've entered and begin provisioning all of my different resources. So deployment in progress, we can watch this go through. And now that that's provisioned, I can click Go to Resource, or I could search for it in the bar, or I could just find it using the other navigation tools. But I'll just click Go to Resource, get rid of that. And I've got my MVPDays Demo 1 function app. And it's running, it's in the subscription, etc. But what I don't have is any actual code running. You can see functions is where code lives, and right now I can expand it. There's no functions. So what I need to do is actually add an Azure function. I'll do that by clicking the plus here for create new. And here's where things start to get a little interesting. Probably most everything else, you've seen something like this before. But this wizard is going to walk me through creating my first function. And it's telling me get started quickly with a pre-made function. I can use a webhook or an API. I can have things run on a timer, so I can have it run every minute or every hour or on the third Thursday of every month. I can do data processing, so I can hook things up to event queues or to monitor specific Azure blobs or things like that. I'm just going to go with a webhook and API, and then I can choose a language. I can go C#, JavaScript, F#, or Java. Those are the languages that are supported that are not in preview. And then you see below PowerShell, Python, Batch. There's others in here as well. You got to create your own custom function. Since I want to dabble in PowerShell, I'm just going to click on Create Your Own Custom Function. And I'll see here that I can set up whatever trigger I want. I can set up an HTTP trigger. I can set up a timer trigger, queue trigger. Those are the ones that we saw before. How about a service bus queue trigger to go whenever a message is added to a specific service bus queue. Blob trigger whenever something's added to a container. So maybe you've got an app that will upload images to a container and you want to resize images every time they get uploaded. So upload an image into the blob. Your Azure Function app will resize it and then return it back to your application. Event Hub, Cosmos DB triggers. You can see there's a lot. I'm not going to go through them all, but look how far I can scroll. It gets pretty out of hand. If I want to see items that work for languages other than just C#, F#, and JavaScript, I've got to turn on experimental language support. And now I can see here's PowerShell. TypeScript is there, Python, Batch, and there's other triggers support different languages. Not every trigger supports every language. You'll see service bus queue trigger. I don't have PowerShell here, so I can't use that one there. But if I go to HTTP trigger, I'm going to be able to use pretty much whatever language I want. So I'm going to tell it I want to work in PowerShell. And I can name this trigger whatever I want. I'm just going to leave it at the default for now because I'm not going to have a whole bunch of different triggers for this function. I'm just going to have this one HTTP trigger, and I'm not going to give it a meaningful name because this app isn't really going to integrate with any other services. Doesn't really matter. Authorization level. Let's use the tooltip for some hints here. The authorization level controls whether the function needs an API key to use. So running these functions costs you money, right? Like even they're very affordable, they're cheap, but they still cost you money, so you don't want to just run them all the time. Maybe your app will expose private data if it's used incorrectly, or you just want to be able to identify people as they request access to your resources. So do you want to use an API key as part of your requests? You can have it as an admin function. Maybe this is an administrative way of accessing your function. You can have a function app just for yes, no access. Are you allowed to use it or not? Or, in my case, I'm just going to go anonymous, and I'm going to open this thing up to the whole entire world. So anybody's going to be able to use the app that I'm about to create. Because I'm very generous, I'm very giving. It's very, very noble of me to do this anonymous access. And then, of course, we get a notice that says this language is experimental, does not yet have full support. If you run into issues, file a bug on their GitHub repo. This doesn't show up, obviously, if you're using one of the first-class citizen languages like C#. And so I'll hit create, and things will load. And this is just going to be what comes up for you. I didn't prepare any of this. This isn't the cooking show trick where you've got one already in the oven. This is the default content where the very first time you fire an Azure function up. You can see I've got a file name here, run.ps1. I've got save and run buttons that we'll look at in a second. Pretty obviously, I've got a text editor here. But what I do also want to show you is if I expand this panel on the right, I've got a menu for viewing files, where I can add files and upload files and delete files, where I've got my run.ps1, that's the file that we're looking at here, and function.json. I'm not going to talk about function.json very much, but it controls different items relative to the function itself. And this is defining some of the input and output streams. So we're just going to look at run.ps1. So before we even look at this code, I can click on test, and I can see what's going to happen if I try to use this app. HTTP method will use post. There's no parameters, no headers, but I need to pass a body to this thing. Let's just see what it does. Let's just hit run. And I need to scroll down so that we can see it. It says, hello, Azure. Well, what the hell just happened? What's this thing actually doing? This is for the post method. The request body is automatically sent in. This is performing a get content of the $REQ. If you remember in our function.json, that's our HTTP trigger. REQ is our request. It's an HTTP trigger, and this is all created for us automatically, so I don't want to go over it too much. But it's our direction in, its authorization level is anonymous, and if we look at it, it's converting the raw content that was sent in the body of the request from JSON. As we were doing our test, you see here the body that we sent was JSON. We just sent a name, property, and a value of Azure. So the name is the request body.name. That makes sense because we sent in a name and a value for that name in the body. We're going to ignore the get method because we didn't use it. And then to reply, what it did was it did an out file encoded as ASCII, and then the file path to $RES. We'll look at that in a second. And the object that it was writing out was just hello name. So this name that we passed it is writing hello name. What is file path $RES? Well, that's our output. Name RES, output type is HTTP, and the direction is out. That is our output. So why, come back here. Why did we use out file? Because what's happening here is kind of weird to explain. And it might be easier illustrated if we just use a small example here. I'm just going to write out the value of RES in our test here. So let me pop open another test. Do this again, and you see that the value of RES is D local temp functions bindings. This is difficult to show you on this resolution, but then there's a GUID, and then RES, which is the name here, the name of our output stream. RES stands for response, and it's really just a binding on the file system where if you write stuff to it Azure will figure out that it's the reply that you want to send to your customer. So I don't even really need this because we're not using gets. So I'm going to just move that out. I'm going to save this, and now this can be our very first function. We're going to do more than this, but this is our first thing. So if I had just PowerShell loaded here, I could do something like body equals name. Let me type this correctly. Name equals Thomas, and let's go body equals body. Convert to JSON. Oh, come on. So now if I look at the contents of the body variable, I've got this just JSON name colon Thomas. And if I look back here, let's make it go basically just tell me what the hello name is. And if I'm running that now, I can do something like invoke rest method, and then how do I hit this thing? I've got my body figured out, but I need to get my function URL. So I'll do that, and I'll click copy. This is the publicly available URL for my function, MVPDays-demo-1.azurewebsites.net, and then here's the API for my HTTP trigger PowerShell 1. That's the name of the trigger that we created for it. So, come back here. Holy. Invoke rest method. Let's actually just make a variable for the URI. And now if I go invoke rest method, we will go to our URI. Our method will be a post, and our body will be body. Now let's just see what happens. Hello, Thomas. Well, that was handy, wasn't it? It did exactly what we'd expect it to do. If we can change our body, let's just take a shortcut here and go name equals, this is MVPDays hi. I'm really good at thinking of these things under pressure, and convert to JSON. And then it says, hello, this is MVPDays hi. So that's awesome. That's dynamically executing on our Azure function. That's taking the request in, it's figuring out what the name property of the request is, and then it's going to just say hello name. So what if we wanted something maybe a little bit more involved than that? Let's take this to the next level here. Let's go, you know what, let's just do kind of like a dice roll thing. Let's go min equals request body dot min, and max equals request body dot max. And we'll do random equals get random minimum min maximum max. And let's do very rudimentary error handling here. Let's go if max is greater than min. Well, formatting never hurt anybody. We'll do that, and then we'll write back our what we're going to type. We'll write back our random number, and otherwise we'll go because if the maximum is not greater than the minimum, then we're going to have problems. You can't have a maximum that's bigger than your minimum, or you can't have a minimum that's bigger than your maximum. We will just write back, oops, min is not smaller than max. Try it again. So, run that to get it going. Now let's see what happens if we just run it exactly how we just did. We've got the name thing still specified, and we don't really expect that to work because we're not looking for a name anymore. We didn't provide it a value for min and max, so we got blank is not smaller than blank. This could probably stand for some better error handling than what we've given it, but let's try with some values that actually make sense here. Let's go min equals 1 and max equals 2 or 4. It's 1, it's 2, it's 1, 2, 3, there we go. The thing about getRandom is it'll never actually give you the maximum number. It'll give you the 1 and the numbers between 1 and up to the max. So this is working. This is a random number generator. And if we screwed up, if we said max is 100, or sorry, min is 100 and max is 4, oops, 100 is not smaller than 4. Try again. There's our error message. Try it again. Get our, let's go with maybe our max is 4,000, 47, 2,044, 436. Looks like it's working to me. So that's our first Azure function. I'm not going to take this too much further than that, but it's up to you to see what makes sense here. If you view these files, you can upload modules, you can have nested folders and other things. You can be sourcing files in here. These scripts don't have to be written in the editor. You can upload them yourself. Obviously, it doesn't just have to be PowerShell. It can be a C# application that you wrote and uploaded. It can be a Python thing. It can be dependent on modules that are available in Azure. For instance, let's just take a quick look at this. We could back this whole thing out. And actually, let's not back the whole thing out. Let's leave the example line that writes things to our output path here. If I wanted to do a little bit of discovery, I could go get module list available. And if I ran that, this is obviously going to be pretty difficult to see in this little window here, but you can see all the modules that are going to be available on this system to be used in our PowerShell scripts. And obviously, if you're writing in Python, you could run commands to do fingerprinting there. This didn't really work out the way I thought it did. Converting the output of getModule to a string isn't great, but it's showing me the PowerShell.operation.validation, package management module, pester module, PowerShell get is there, PS readline, PowerShell operation validation, all types of things, and it's kind of listing them in a strange way. I've got branch cache sim commandlets. You can tell this is installed on Windows. DISM, there's probably some Azure items in here as well if I keep looking. And if there's not, I could install them. Yeah, here we go. Here's the Azure stuff. I could import the Azure RM automation module. And so I can work with any of the other Azure things in here as well. I can authenticate to Azure and then use this to provision a new blob storage or delete a automation runbook, etc. The point I'm making here is that the possibilities with what you can do with these function apps are truly endless and limited only by what you want to do with them. So I highly encourage you to take a dabble, get a look at these, and see what works for you. Real quick before we wrap up here, if we explore the rest of this, I can integrate on the left here, use this integrate tab to create more triggers or edit the ones that we have. I can maybe only use selected methods. Maybe I only want get and post. I don't want put and patch and things available. I can change the request parameter name and manipulate things like mode, which is semantics related to webhooks. I can change authorization levels to make this administrative. Add documentation is always a good idea. If I go into manage, I can create new function keys and new host keys. So if I want to make it so that you have to use an API key to get at this thing, I can add a new function key and say, is this required? Is it not required? Who is eligible to use this? And then if I go into monitor, this is the last thing I want to show you. If I click on this, and it will load for me because it's very fast. Here we are. Success count since the beginning of the month, 15. I haven't had any errors since February 1st. Let's generate an error real quick and just see what happens. Let's just pass it a string. And this should give me some sadness. There we go, there's an error. If I go back and refresh this now, come back in here. I did a great job of refreshing that. Now I've got an error. There's my error. So the error doesn't have to be you wrote the app in a way that caused an error. I just got an error when it tried to do its thing. So if I can click on this and see that the method was post, here's the trigger they hit, information about the context, the response, and then here's even the error that it gave me. Invalid JSON primitive high. It didn't like my convert from JSON because the thing I was putting into it was bad. So that was my response. That was my error. Then I can go and look at good ones, and I can see that there's no real logs here because it just worked. As I change, I get this little blue arrow that indicates which one I'm looking at. I suppose I should have just used refresh here. And then here's the rest of my logs. 14 minutes ago, a minute ago, you can sort these differently. You can export these or gather these logs from a PowerShell console, export them. You can use them. You can use errors in Azure Functions to trigger other Azure Functions if you want to. All the different ways of triggering functions, very robust, very flexible. All the different languages it supports, again, very robust and very flexible. There's nothing you can't do in here, so I highly encourage you to take a look at it. And with that, let us wrap it up here, and I'll remind you again, if you want to talk to me, I'm on Twitter at Mr. Thomas Rayner. I'm on LinkedIn, there's the URL. And my blog is, usually I'm blogging about PowerShell, IT strategy, DevOps related stuff. I'd love to talk to you guys about this and anything else that's on your mind. Otherwise, thank you very much for riding along with me, and hopefully you're going to go write your first Azure function right now. Or at least not until after you're done enjoying the rest of MVP days. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.